Welcome to Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast with Alexia Leachman, the weekly 9-month podcast to help parents-to-be look forward to their fear-free childbirth. Alexia is a pregnancy and head trash clearance coach and the author of Fear-Free Childbirth, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy and a Positive, Pain-Free Birth. As a mum who's had 2 fear-free and pain-free births, Alexia wants to share with you how she overcame her pregnancy and childbirth fears so that you can look forward to having a fear-free birth too. Over the 9-month life of this podcast, Alexia will be sharing some real-life stories from mums and dads, insights into the latest childbirth research, inspiring tales from birth professionals, and some tips and techniques for clearing your fears and stresses. If you would like to receive a free chapter from her book, then head over to fearfreechildbirth.com, where you can also sign up for her email series, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy. But now, it's time for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast, and this is me, your host, Alexia Leachman, and thank you so much for joining me today. Now, as you know, I want to help you to have a fear-free childbirth. That is what this podcast is all about. And for me, a huge part of that is managing your emotional journey while you're pregnant so that you are marinading your baby in beautiful, positive, emotional juices rather than the negative stuff that can build up and really impact your birth in a negative way. But also, it's really, really important to marinate your baby in positive emotions during your pregnancy, because those emotions will also be experienced by baby and can contribute to setting the baby's emotional blueprint for life if you're not careful. So managing your emotions during pregnancy is really, really important. And for me, one thing that can really tip you off balance when you're pregnant in terms of your emotional state are your symptoms. If you start experiencing any kind of pregnancy symptom, and the likelihood is that you will, then this can really bring with it a whole cascade of negative emotions, because you can get really frustrated and really annoyed and stressed by your symptoms, particularly if they're quite hardcore, and particularly if you just keep getting one after the other, you can feel a bit done in. And you feel a little bit helpless as well, because you can't take anything for it. You've got to be very careful with the medication that you're allowed to take. And so it can feel very overwhelming very, very quickly. So this is what I want to help with you today, because I want to let you know that there is hope, that you do not have to suffer in silence. So what on earth am I going to share with you? Well, listen up. I've got a guest today who's going to be talking about how epigenetics can help you on your pregnancy journey. And now you're thinking, what on earth is epigenetics? Well, I'm not going to try and tell you, because I've tried already and I've just scrubbed out so many intros, because I cannot describe epigenetics. I can't even say the word. I'd much rather let the expert do that. And I've got a brilliant expert on today who's an epigeneticist, and she is called Sharan Sadar. Now, I first came across Sharan's work because I interviewed her on my Head Trash Show podcast. So if you haven't heard the Head Trash Show podcast, you might want to check it out. And it's basically for those that want to help to clear their head trash or negative thoughts, feelings and emotions. And there is a whole episode on there where I chat to Sharan about epigenetics and the role that it can help, how head trash and epigenetics are linked and all that good stuff. So it's really worth listening to, because she touches during the chat today on some of the stuff that we talked about in the other podcast. But the great thing about Sharan and the work that she does is she works a lot with people on their pregnant journeys. And also she works with couples that are trying to conceive as well, that may have problems conceiving. So there really is a way of working with some of the challenges that we have around conception and around pregnancy. And one of those ways that you can work is using epigenetics. So rather than just keep throwing this long word at you and you not knowing what on earth I'm on about, why don't I just hand over the time when I spoke to Sharan, and she will explain what epigenetics is. She also shares we talk about a great book that I used a lot during my pregnancy journey to get rid of some of my pregnancy symptoms. So we talk about what that book is, and I'll have full details of that in the podcast show notes. And she talks about some of the things that she has helped women with on their pregnancy journey. So things like morning sickness, like gestational diabetes, and of course, as I've mentioned already, people who are struggling to conceive in the first place. So I hope that you're going to find today's podcast useful, and particularly really to help you ultimately to get rid of the fear that these symptoms are going to be stuck with you till the end, and there is a way of getting around it, of dealing with it, of addressing them, or of getting relief from some of these symptoms, that you don't have to live with them until the baby is born. So I'm just going to hand over now to the time that I spoke to Duran about how epigenetics can help you on your pregnancy journey. Well, today on the show, we're going to be talking about the field of epigenetics and how epigenetics can assist you on your pregnancy journey. So that's before pregnancy, during pregnancy, and after pregnancy. And today, to help me do that, I've got Sharan Sadar on the call. Welcome to the podcast, Sharan.
Thank you, Alexia. It's good to be here again.
Yes, I mean, we spoke already on my Head Trash Show podcast, and I have to say, when we did have that chat on the Head Trash Show podcast about epigenetics, I dived straight in and was using a load of the stuff that you shared with us. So now that I've got the Fear-Free Childbirth podcast, I was like, I've got to get you back on, because so much of this stuff is relevant to pregnancy, because I myself used loads of it during my own pregnancy. So before we dive into how epigenetics can assist you on your pregnancy journey, just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself before we get going.
Well, my background is as a geneticist. I worked 13 years in a laboratory, actually at the Birmingham Children's Hospital, and in the UK. And I was working with actually identifying mutations or changes in the DNA that were resulting in conditions of the blood, such as hemophilia, von Willebrand's disease, so different sorts of things like that. And but there came a point where I wanted to move. Well, actually, it was the contract came to an end, but I had a whole interest in the mind-body aspect, and how that connects with our physical body, and how our emotions and perceptions and beliefs play a whole huge role in the way that we show up physically in our body, and whether that's to do with us and how we feel during pregnancy or after pregnancy and even before. All of that impacts all of that. But it's after that I left the hospital and moved on to working as an epigeneticist. And really what that is about how our beliefs, perceptions, emotions impact the way that our genes are expressed. And a good way, I love this analogy, it's if you have a pot of soup, you can put in you've got your own soup, but then what happens is you've got the soup of everyone else in there, not the soup, the ingredients of other people in there. And what I mean by that is that the ancestors, the generations, and say 2 generations ago there was a drought or a famine, and your grandparents were experiencing that. Or even if you look at World War II, with what happened with the Jews, and that whole energy of that has an impact, and it's been shown scientifically to impact our bodies now. And so what we experience right now has an impact on our children and on the pregnancy, the child that we create, and is created through us, and the whole thing. So it's not something that we can actually separate and say, it's just getting pregnant and that's about it. It's, it's not like that. There's a whole amount of stuff that goes into this soup that creates something. So what I do is actually look at how we can make it much more of a pure tasting soup, if that's a good analogy. I mean, another analogy is, if you go into a house and it's not, you bought a house, but whoever owned the house before left all their stuff there.
Yeah.
And you have to go in and you have to clear it all out.
Yeah.
And that's the analogy of the stuff that we have actually inherited. So this inherited energy impacts the way that our genes are expressed. And so it's really important to be aware that when we are going to have a child or we are pregnant, then it's important to actually look at what is, in inverted commas, cluttering our energy system in order to allow for that child to have another whole new experience rather than passing all of that on to the child.
Now, you talked about expressing genes or how the genes are expressed. Would you mind just sort of explaining that to those that aren't really sure what that means exactly?
So if you think of Christmas lights, you put them on the tree and then you see them light up, and there's different ways, different sequences that it lights up in. You might get a blue, red, and green, or you might get red, yellow, and blue. It's if the genes in our body are actually red in that way, and from them are created proteins. So the proteins then influence the way that our body functions. So it's if you have certain energies, or again, inverted commas, using the analogy of the cluttered house, the way that the light sequence will be expressed will be different. It won't be a positive gene expression. It's more of I've got this, I need to jump over this sequence to kind of, and this is just very crude explanation here, express it in a different way. So the light sequence is different, creating a different protein, which then is as a result of having that clutter in the house. So it's important to, with the gene expression, what we're looking at is to have your pure divine expression, or the expression that we're meant to have, clearing out everything else. And so that's what would then influence and allow for the body to express itself in the way it's meant to.
So it sounds to me like, when you're talking about the way that genes are expressed, and I think sort of a lot of people are concerned when they're pregnant or going through the pregnancy journey that there might be sort of genetic conditions, in inverted commas, that are passed on to children, or that they maybe got from their parents. And so what you're saying here is that there's no such thing as a genetic condition, in a way, that you might not express that gene and therefore create that condition. But there is a possibility that if you declutter the energy or the house, get rid of those old energies, that the gene won't express in that way, and therefore it's not a determined thing that you will pass on a condition or you will inherit a condition. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but there is this. Yes, why I'm kind of hesitating is because yes, there are certain conditions that are expressed. You do have inherited conditions like the ones that I used to work on in the hospital, von Willebrand's and hemophilia, and you've got thalassemia, and, they do get expressed. And I've never really, actually, to be honest, I have worked on two particular cases, and that is that there's a condition called tongue tie and lip tie, and it's a genetic condition passed on from the parents to the child, and it inhibits the movement of the tongue, and so then there's other things that come along with it. Now, I have actually worked with a lady during pregnancy for that, and cleared the energy around that. So there was this inherited energy there that was contributing to that. And to just give you another example, cystic fibrosis is one of those diseases that is life-threatening and genetic, and it's passed on again. If both parents have one of those genes, then it's passed on to the child, and it's the lifespan of those children, I think, is very short, and they have a tendency to have a lot of mucus build up in their body, and so there's that risk of always having infections and all that. Now, I worked with, and I have permission to share this from the mother, I actually worked with a cystic fibrosis child. She is, I think, if I remember correctly, 6, 7 or 8, maybe 8, and she was beginning to have symptoms of that. And the thing to mention here is that when she was diagnosed as having cystic fibrosis, and this is a really important point, is that the parents actually decided to not have the belief system to say that this is what the child has. And it wasn't a denial, it was a choice they made, in the sense that they said, well, you know what, we're going to choose the fact that she is healthy, and we're not even going to mention cystic fibrosis in the house. And so they did that. So she stayed well for a while. And then at one point when she started to get more mucus buildup and things were starting to happen, she got in touch with me. And she has been clear.
Wow.
And I think she's 8 now.
Wow.
But she's clear. She's living a normal life. She gets, if the family, how it is, if one person gets the cold in the house, the other people get it too, and so she'll get that, and she's been fine. And so that's been a great example to show that actually when we declutter, then it is possible to have that positive, express that power in your DNA, which is already there.
Yeah. And so what we're talking about here is really, you mentioned beliefs already. We're talking about the emotions that we experience, the beliefs, the values. It's that kind of emotional cocktail of stuff that is essentially our emotional well-being and how we kind of interact with the world, isn't it? And how we interpret what's happening to us. And it's working on all that kind of stuff, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. And I'll quickly mention a study that was done, and that is that they had children that had been adopted. They looked at these children that had been adopted into families that had cancer, a certain kind of cancer that was genetic in their family. And so you would assume that these children that had been adopted wouldn't inherit the same, symptoms or cancer, but what they found was that they actually did. And so that even tells us that it's actually what we pick up in our environment, and that the analogy of the house, the clutter that we're around, the energy of the beliefs, the perceptions, and the way of being, that actually it's so unconscious. It's not something that's conscious in our conscious awareness. I mean, you wouldn't want to do that consciously at all, but it's what they pick up. And then that then expresses itself in the body.
So thinking about, we mentioned already that, you can sort of use epigenetics, and the idea of epigenetics sort of in the lead up to pregnancy, sort of even before. So are you sort of hinting at sort of the idea of people that are trying to conceive and fertility and that kind of thing with epigenetics, that you can kind of assist that journey as well?
Yes. They're, assisting with the reason why it can be helped. It can be used to help along that whole journey and assist the person, is that if we're looking at why something's not happening, there's got to be something there that is getting in the way of that actually showing up. And so it's about going in to that the energy field of the person and identifying what that is. And when that, it's kind of like a clog in the wheel, if you just take the clog out, then you've got the wheel just kind of moving, and it just does its thing.
Yeah.
So if you've got something going on, then it's a representation of something that's getting in the way of it actually moving forward.
So you're saying that basically by sort of evaluating all that in advance, you can kind of almost help to create the conditions that mean that you're more able to conceive and procreate.
Yes. And, I'm working with a couple right now who want to conceive by the end of the year. And they both want to be in a place where they actually have none of this clutter that they want to pass on to the child, so that they can actually be in a position to actually create, to not even have to go in afterwards to do that, but to do it before it even happens. And of course, nothing's guaranteed 100%, but what we do is to allow for them to feel good about themselves, to allow for them to actually move into more of a position of to work through all their stuff that they've had in their life and get to a position where they're actually in a, I feel good about myself. And when we can get to that position and then conceive, you can imagine, that whole energy of conceiving where you've got issues and this and that and everything else is happening, and then you conceive with that energy. That in itself, you don't need me to tell you that that's going to be creating something amazing.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So moving on to the pregnancy, when you're pregnant then, and one thing that certainly that my own experience is that I really tapped into the idea of epigenetics when I was pregnant. Now, I had a load of symptoms and stuff that in my second pregnancy that I just wanted to be rid of them, to be honest. And I was able to work on things like that and get rid of them by working on the emotional aspects. So, and I know that you've worked with women like this. When we've chatted before, you've mentioned things like morning sickness that you're able to help women with. And I know that this is, their pregnancy symptoms is a huge source of stress for women in their pregnancy and can be really frustrating. So would you mind just talking a little bit more about how we can use epigenetics to assist us during the pregnancy journey?
Yeah, so morning sickness, it's interesting because really what that is that there is actually a disconnection between the mother and the child on different levels. And so the work that can be done is to actually go in and check where those disconnections, we're talking about the energetic disconnections, and reconnect those. And once those reconnections are made, the morning sickness literally disappears.
Wow.
And it's so interesting because I wish I'd known that when I was pregnant, but way back. But right now it's so important that this tool is there for people and it's possible to do that. Now, the other important thing during pregnancy, and actually, before pregnancy, even when I'm working with, like I said, that couple, getting them more in touch with their heart space, getting in touch with that energy of the truth within them. What happens is that during pregnancy, it's important to actually have that connection to the heart of the child. And so having cleared it before, or even if it's during pregnancy, to work with the mother to actually clear that energy that's getting in the way of the child and the mother being able to have that pure divine connection, heart to heart. Because, a lot of moms will say to me, well, I'm really afraid of this happening, or what if this happens during pregnancy, and what if that happens? And I say, in the sense that they're talking about, well, what if I'm something, traumatic? You can't stop life, right? So sometimes, someone passes away while you're pregnant, or if you hear about some news, and so you're always being bombarded with stuff. So how do you stop that from impacting the baby? Now, the whole point here is that you actually go into fear just from wanting to not experience that. And so it's so important to actually be in the space where you can actually say, it's okay, no matter what's going on, I am holding this baby in love. And that energy in itself is transformational in how that baby actually can receive it and then be continue to grow in that. It's like it's bathed in love, no matter what goes on. And yes, the mom will experience that. And I've gone in to work with people when they're older, and there's been emotions that have been trapped in them as a result of pregnancy when mom was experiencing something that was traumatic. So it's basically what I'm saying is it kind of goes, there's so much to say.
Yeah.
But it's the main thing here is that it's so important to have that heart-to-heart connection. And I know we've talked about it, I think, in the last podcast, but it's about, checking to see if mum's got a heart wall. And what that is basically emotions around the heart as we go through life. And sometimes these emotions can also be inherited, so it's passed on from generations. And they can be like a filter through which our heart actually sees life or feels life. And so if you have that filter in place, say for instance of grief, then you're going to be sending signals to the child through that. And so that child will then receive and perceive life through that when it's born even. Because it's been that's what it it got used to. So it's important to actually clear all that, look at, it's just so much. But it's basically boils down to opening up the space between the baby and the child and the heart.
And it sounds to me as well like, you mentioned that if mum is experiencing, whatever emotional journey mum's on while she's pregnant, that the baby's going to be picking up on all that. And so if you are going through some of that emotional stuff, to really kind of deal with it as much as you can and work through it, as opposed to hold on to it and deny it, because you need to just move through it and let it go, because otherwise baby's going to have it. Is that what you're saying? Yeah, well, the baby's definitely going to be picking up on it. And there was a study done with the 9/11, and what they found was that mothers who were in their third trimester, who experienced the 9/11, the whole thing, they found that those children had a raised level of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. And so that then, impacts their life in a whole different way. So it's, like you said, it's important to move through it. And, anything that a mother goes through in pregnancy, if she can, like you said, go through it rather than stick it down into, I'm not going to look at it, I because that doesn't help. It's about energy, and emotions are energy. They move. And if we can just be present to what we're experiencing in our body, that allows things to move much quicker, rather than sort of saying, I'm not going to feel that, I'm not going to feel that. Yeah. Because negative emotions move quite slowly, if not crawl along, and they just get trapped, don't they? They just kind of get clogged up. Yeah, they do. And like you said, if you can focus in on them and just be aware of them. A quick exercise for people to do is just, whatever you're feeling during the day, just feel where it is in your body, and just you can feel it. It'll be like either a kind of like an energy of a wave, or something that's kind of, I don't know. It could be all sorts of sensations that you just feel. For example, yesterday I was listening to something and I just tuned into my body, and I felt like there was an energy around my throat, and I just stayed with it. There's no judgment as to what you're experiencing, and as you continue to just be aware of it, that energy will move. Yeah. And that's all you need to do. Yeah. And I know it sounds simplistic, but it really can be that simple sometimes. And I think the important thing to say there is you just need to be present and in the moment to be able to do that, rather than, it's not really possible to do that if you're worrying about stuff that's happening in your life, or you're not living in the present. Yeah, totally. So, now I know that when we had our first podcast chat, so we keep referring to this podcast chat, so the one I'm referring to is on the Head Trash Show podcast, where I spoke to Charan and we talked at length about epigenetics. So if you want to hear us talking about the Christmas lights that she touched on already and more, then do check out that podcast. But one thing that you mentioned during that podcast was a book called The Emotion Code. So you've mentioned The Heart Wall, and this is a book by Dr. Bradley Nelson. You mentioned The Heart Wall, which is something that sort of he talks about. And after that podcast chat, I went out and bought that book, and that book proved to be one of my best friends during my pregnancy, because I used that whenever I had a new pregnancy symptom pop up. The first thing I would do was try and figure out what emotion it was linked to. So you already touched on the idea that these emotions can get trapped, and if we don't kind of focus on them and let them kind of move through, then they'll just get stuck. And sometimes that manifests as symptoms, doesn't it? Is there something, can you tell us a little bit more about all that stuff? Yeah, great book. So I highly recommend it. I'm so glad you did go through that. Because that book, you can learn how to do it yourself on yourself. So, these emotions, they're literally, if you say, for instance, you experience shock, and that emotion of shock, if we don't let it flow like what we just said just now, and it's not a judgment that we do that if we're not doing it, or, sometimes it can be so intense that it does get stuck, and it happens to me too, we all do, it's life. But it's literally a ball of energy that can get stuck in our body, and
if you think about it, everything in our body is energy, because if we go down to the cells and then the DNA, and then further and further down, atoms, electrons and protons and neutrons, and further and further, and it's just space. There's just energy there. And this energy is making up the organs and the glands and everything. So when the shock comes in and gets trapped, the energy frequency of the shock is different from your tissues and organs. So what begins to happen is that interaction between the emotion and the energy of your organs and glands. And so the organs and glands can't resonate at their own frequency because this shock is trapped there. So what begins to happen is that you may get a physical symptom show up that is basically the body's wisdom telling us that there's something here. Can you listen? And so if you did, like you said, you bought the book, you can get the book and you can just go in and you can find out what that is. What is causing this particular symptom, and release it. It's a beautiful way of doing it. I had there was an 18-year-old who got the book, excuse me, and she went back. She was reading the book and she decided to work on herself. She had a pineapple phobia, and what she found was that she trapped an emotion, which she had actually, because emotions can also be absorbed, and this is important to know as well, because when children are born, up to the age of 7 and 8, maybe 9, they're in that state that where they can absorb emotions and things around us, and that's how they learn all the languages, and they learn so much during that period. They were literally like sponges. But what she found was that at that time, she was living with her grandmother who had a phobia of pineapples. And she actually inherited an emotion from her grandmother. And so when she released that emotion, her mom had some pineapple in the fridge. And she brought it out. And she actually ate it, first time ever.
Wow.
So this is just, a great example of how things can happen and connect it all. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. One of the things that I experienced when I was pregnant is I started getting really bad, and I Googled it, which is always a bad thing to do when you have a symptom, but I did Google it, and because it sounded quite serious, my pelvic bones were clicking as I walked, and I had really bad upper leg pain, and this is what I found from Google, quite common, and actually it's got a name that boils down to an acronym, PGD, pelvic girdle distress. And so I thought, I'm gonna try and work on this. And then when I Googled it, I thought, oh no, maybe the emotion code can't work on something like this, because it sounded really, really serious. Basically, if you get PGD, according to Wikipedia or any number of sources on Google, you're pretty much stuck with it until you give birth. But you can get weekly physio if you want, and it might relieve the pain. But you're basically stuck with it. And I was like, this is a nightmare. My bones are out of, my bones have changed, like, they're in a different position. It's clicking. It felt quite serious to me and very, very painful. I couldn't sleep. And I thought, I'm going to give it a go anyway. So I worked using the emotion code, and I worked for about an hour in the middle of the night when I couldn't sleep, clearing the emotions that were contributing to this PGD. I had the best sleep ever after that, the most sleep I think I ever had during my pregnancy. Woke up and it had gone completely.
Amazing.
And I was amazed. I mean, I was saying to my other half, I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is amazing. He's like, you do this work all the time. Why are you finding it so amazing? I was like, you can still be in complete awe when the body is able to kind of heal itself. This is an incredible thing. And so I thought it's worth sharing that, because even something that on the face of it feels like, well, there's no way this stuff's going to work. And it managed to get my bones to get back into position and stop causing me pain while I was asleep, which I'm still in awe of that experience today. And that was all down to using the emotion code. I just literally used that book to sort that out on my own. And I didn't have to have physio, didn't have to have anything.
It's amazing.
It's an incredible thing. And I hope that other women can kind of, buy the book and use it whenever they have stuff happening to them. Now, you mentioned morning sickness. Is there any other kind of things that you've helped women with during their pregnancy that, like there's one thing that comes up quite a bit is gestational diabetes or other things like that. Do you have experience of working with people like that?
Yes, I have worked with gestational diabetes, and it's been helpful in allowing the mother to actually balance the sugar levels. Definitely, the whole thing is that if you have any symptoms, it's basically the body's way of saying, listen, there's something here that needs attention. And so, people say, well, can you help me with this or can you help me with that? And even in, during pregnancies, the whole thing is that if there's anything that's showing up, then there's something there behind it, and the body's telling us, and the symptom is a signal from the body saying, have a look and see what's going on here, because I can't function optimally with it here. And so, yes. With any symptom, really.
Yeah. Now, moving towards the sort of the birth part of the pregnancy. Now, one thing that now I actually booked a session in with you just in the lead up in the few, I think 2 or 3 weeks before my due date, because I wanted to try and ensure that there was no blocked energy anywhere that might prevent a smooth, easy birth, because I wanted to do everything I could in the preparation phase to try and, clear the decks on all levels, as it were, to help that happen. And happy to say, obviously, that my birth went wonderfully. And I did a load of other work as well to prepare for that. But I just wondered if there's anything else that do you often work with women in that way to help them prepare for that birthing moment for childbirth?
Like I said, anything, everything is because, like, for instance, I'm working with a lady who had issues with breastfeeding her first child, and it was so traumatic that now she wants to clear that so that, during the next pregnancy she's not having those issues. And it's in fact showing up as being not even anything that you would think about. It's to do with other stuff that's happened in her life, even inherited things that are actually resulting in that issue. So, like I said, there's so much
that you can help, that use this to help clear and create a more healthy, optimum version of what's going on.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sharon, for coming on and sharing these stories and insights. And for those of you listening who really want to sort of find out more, then I'm going to put all the links, especially to that brilliant Bradley Nelson book, in the podcast show notes. But if anybody is interested in finding out more about your work, Sharon, where can they find out more about you online?
They can go to my website. It's CHARAN, and all my social media links are on there. So I am actually going to be doing my first launch of the website, which I've just directed you to. So that's towards the end of May. And that's actually going to be an event that I'm doing online too. So if anyone's interested, just basically to explain epigenetics and explain, I've got an acronym for the word genome, and so going through that with regards to how that can be helpful. So if people are interested, they can look that up.
Fabulous. Well, I'll have all those links in the podcast show notes. So if you have managed to scribble that down, then you just need to come to the fearfreechildbirth.com website where this podcast will be featured, and you can get all the online links there. So once again, Sharon, thank you so much for joining me on the Fear Free Childbirth podcast today.
Thank you, Alexia.
Thank you for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman from the Fear Free Childbirth podcast. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really love it if you left a review on iTunes or Stitcher, or shared it with a friend. And don't forget, to get a free chapter from her book, head over to fearfreechildbirth.com to get your copy, as well as finding other episodes in this podcast and more about how Alexia can help you with pregnancy and birth preparation coaching. Until next time.